The chandelier wept crystal tears over a sea of forced smiles. Marcus Ellington stood near a marble column, a ghost in a room screaming with ambition. This was the Innovators Ascent Gala, New York City's annual coronation of the tech gods. And he was, by any metric, a titan among them. Yet he wore his power like a well-tailored but invisible cloak. A simple, dark suit. No ostentatious watch. No entourage. He was an observer. A man who had learned that true power didn't need to announce itself. It simply was. The air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and unspoken ambition, buzzed with the practiced laughter of industry titans and the hungry murmurs of journalists. Marcus nursed a glass of sparkling water, his gaze sweeping over the scene. He saw rivals shake hands with smiles that didn't reach their eyes, and venture capitalists circle young founders like sharks sensing blood. It was a familiar dance, one he had mastered long ago. Then, a voice, slick with the unearned confidence of generational wealth, cut through the din. "Hey, you, garçon, another round of the Cristal for my table over there. And be quick about it." Marcus turned slowly. Before him stood a young man, barely in his late 20s, draped in a designer suit that seemed a size too loud for his frame. A diamond-encrusted watch gleamed on his wrist, a gaudy supernova. This was Brandon Hale, a name Marcus vaguely recognized from the society pages, a professional son, famous for his father's fortune. Brandon's eyes flickered over Marcus's understated attire with open disdain. He gestured impatiently with his champagne flute. "Did you hear me? Catering. Table 7. Chop chop." The small circle of people around Brandon chuckled, a sycophantic chorus to his arrogance. A journalist nearby lowered her camera, a slight, predatory smile playing on her lips. This was a moment, not a big one, but a morsel of social drama to be savored. For a split second, the glittering ballroom dissolved. The scent of perfume vanished, replaced by the smell of stale coffee and machine oil. The crystal chandelier morphed into a single, flickering fluorescent bulb in a cramped workshop. Marcus was no longer a billionaire in a bespoke suit, but a boy of 12, standing in the shadow of his father. His father, David Ellington, was a brilliant engineer, a gentle man with calloused hands and a mind that saw the world in elegant, interlocking systems. He was standing in his own workshop, blueprints spread across a worn wooden table, explaining his revolutionary logistics software to a man in a sharp suit. The man was his business partner, a charismatic salesman with a shark's smile. "David, this is incredible," the partner had said, his eyes gleaming with a light that wasn't admiration, but avarice. "But let's be honest, you're the engine guy. I'm the one who sells the car. People buy the shine, not the pistons." The partner had then turned, spotting a potential investor who had just walked in. He clapped David on the shoulder, a gesture that was both familiar and dismissive. "Get us some coffee, will you? Dave, be a good chap." His father, the architect of the entire enterprise, had just been mistaken for an errand boy in his own sanctuary. He had frozen, his face a mask of stunned humiliation. He looked at his son, and in that moment, 12-year-old Marcus saw his hero shrink. The world had told his brilliant father that he was invisible, a mere cog in a machine someone else would drive. Weeks later, the partner dissolved the company, stealing the patents and leaving the Ellington family with nothing but debt and the bitter taste of betrayal. They lost everything: the house, the savings, the future. His father never recovered. The light in his eyes dimmed, and he passed away a few years later, a man broken not by failure, but by dismissal. The memory, sharp and agonizing, flared and then receded in an instant. The ballroom snapped back into focus, The clinking glasses. The false laughter. Brandon Hale's impatient, condescending face. It was the same face, the same casual cruelty, the same assumption that a man's worth was dictated by the label on his suit rather than the content of his character. Marcus's jaw tightened, a movement so subtle it was almost imperceptible. The storm raging within him was ancient and terrifying, but on the surface, he was a frozen lake. He met Brandon's gaze, and his eyes, usually warm amber, were now chips of glacial ice. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I believe you've made a mistake," Marcus said, his voice a low, calm vibration that cut through the surrounding chatter more effectively than a shout. Brandon scoffed. "The only mistake is you being slow. Now, are you getting the drinks, or do I need to speak to your manager?" Before Marcus could respond, a new voice intervened. A man with sleek, salt and pepper hair and a politician's smile glided to Brandon's side. He was older, his suit perfectly tailored, his aura radiating a cold, corporate authority. "Brandon, what's the holdup?" Brandon gestured dismissively at Marcus. "Just trying to get some service. Dad, this one seems a little deaf." The older man's eyes fell on Marcus. For a fraction of a second. A flicker of recognition, or something colder, crossed his features. He was Richard Kane, the CEO of Sky West Horizons, one of the largest airlines in the country and, incidentally, a major client of Ellington Systems. Kane's smile was a masterpiece of corporate diplomacy. It was polite, apologetic, and utterly demeaning. "My apologies for my son's enthusiasm," he said, his voice smooth as polished marble. He gave Marcus a once-over, his gaze lingering on the simple suit. "The staff here is usually so prompt. We'll just find someone else." He placed a hand on his son's back, steering him away as if Marcus had ceased to exist. As they turned, Marcus heard Brandon mutter, "Can't believe they let guys dress like that in here. Looks like he rented his suit." The wound, ripped open moments ago by the son, was now salted by the father. The humiliation was no longer just a painful echo of the past. It was a living, breathing thing, inflicted by the very man who now ran a corporate empire built on the principles of service and respect. Marcus stood perfectly still. The journalist who had been watching scribbled something in her notebook. The people nearby exchanged knowing glances. In the world of high society, a public slight was blood in the water. They had all witnessed Marcus Ellington, the quiet tech mogul, be treated like wallpaper. They expected him to be angry, to cause a scene, to retreat in shame. He did none of those things. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his water. His expression was unreadable, a mask of serene control. But behind that mask, a decision had been made. A cold, precise calculation was already running, processing decades of pain and channeling it into a single, focused objective. Richard Kane and his son had not just insulted a man. They had reopened a grave, and they had no idea what they were about to unleash. This was no longer about a simple act of disrespect. It was a declaration of war, a war that Marcus Ellington had been unknowingly preparing for his entire life. The drive back to his penthouse was a silent, brooding journey through the neon-drenched canyons of Manhattan. The city's electric pulse, usually a source of energy for Marcus, felt like a series of irritating jolts against his frayed nerves. He sat in the back of the town car, the city lights sliding over his face, illuminating the hard set of his jaw. The scent of leather and conditioned air did nothing to calm the firestorm in his mind. He dismissed his driver and rode the private elevator up to his apartment, a sprawling space of glass and minimalist design suspended over the city. but the panoramic view of the glittering skyline offered no solace. Tonight, the city looked like a circuit board, cold, complex, and ready to be manipulated. He loosened his tie and poured a glass of bourbon, the amber liquid catching the light. He didn't drink it. He just held the cool, heavy glass, the condensation beating against his fingers. He walked to the window and stared down at the relentless flow of traffic, a river of red and white lights. The faces of Brandon Hale and Richard Caney were seared into his memory. Caney's polite dismissal had been worse than his son's overt arrogance. It was the same veiled condescension his father had faced, the polite smile that communicated you were not worth their time, that you were fundamentally less. He knew he could crush them. A few phone calls, a few reallocated contracts, and SkyWest Horizons would feel a tremor. But that was too simple, too crude. It was the revenge of a brute, not a strategist. This required precision. It required a plan that was as elegant and devastating as the code he wrote. He wanted them to understand, to feel the consequences of their actions not as a sudden blow, but as a slow, inexorable collapse. He wanted them to watch their empire crumble, piece by piece, and to know, with chilling certainty, exactly why it was happening. His phone buzzed on the marble countertop. It was Ethan Cole, his COO, and the closest thing he had to a friend. Ethan was a man who understood the world in data points and strategic vectors, a perfect counterbalance to Marcus's more intuitive, visionary approach. "How was the gala?" Ethan's voice was crisp, all business. "Did you schmooze with the venture capital vultures?" "Something like that," Marcus said, his voice flat. He swirled the bourbon in his glass. "Ethan, I have a project for you. I need you to do a deep dive on two people, Brandon Hale and his father, Richard Kane." There was a pause on the other end. "Caney, the CEO of SkyWest. They're one of our biggest accounts. Is there a problem with the contract renewal?" "You could say that," Marcus replied, his voice hardening. "I don't want a standard corporate profile. I want everything: personal histories, business dealings, old partnerships, skeletons in the closet. I want to know who they were before they became who they are. I want to know how they built their empire." Ethan, ever perceptive, caught the edge in his tone. "Marcus, what happened?" Marcus took a deep breath, the memory of his father's defeated face flashing behind his eyes. "They reminded me of something I tried to forget. Just dig. Ethan, spare no expense. I want it on my desk by the end of the week." He ended the call and finally took a sip of the bourbon. It burned a path down his throat, a welcome heat against the ice forming in his veins. He walked into his study, a room lined with books on engineering, philosophy, and history. On a small, unassuming shelf sat a single, faded photograph in a simple silver frame. It was a picture of two young men in their 20s, standing in front of a small workshop. They were smiling, arms thrown over each other's shoulders, full of the boundless optimism of youth. One was his father, David Ellington, his eyes bright with intelligence and kindness. The other was a sharp, handsome young man with a familiar, predatory smile. Marcus had looked at this photo 1,000 times, but tonight, he saw it with new eyes. He had never known the name of his father's partner, the man who had betrayed him. His father had refused to speak it, as if the name itself was a curse. The man in the picture was just a ghost, a nameless villain in his family's tragedy. A cold dread began to creep up his spine. He picked up the frame, his fingers tracing the outline of the smiling, treacherous face. It was impossible. It had to be. But the more he stared, the more a terrifying certainty took hold. The charming, Ambitious young man in the photograph was unmistakably a younger, leaner version of Richard Kane. The room seemed to tilt. The incident at the gala was not a random act of arrogance from a stranger. It was a historical echo, a cruel twist of fate that tied his present to his most painful past. Richard Kane wasn't just another condescending CEO. He was the man who had destroyed his father. He was the architect of his family's ruin. And Kane had looked at him tonight. Had there been recognition in his eyes? Was his dismissal not just casual contempt, but a deliberate power play? A calculated message sent across the decades: I broke your father. And I can break you. You are still nothing. The bourbon glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. But Marcus didn't notice. The rage that had been simmering inside him erupted into a white-hot inferno. This was no longer about revenge for a personal slight. This was about justice. A justice that was 30 years overdue. He now understood. His life's work. The building of Ellington Systems. The accumulation of wealth and power, it had all been leading to this moment. He had, without knowing it, been forging the weapons he would need to confront the ghost that had haunted his family for generations. He looked back at the photograph, at the image of his father's hopeful smile next to Kane's deceitful one. I will not let you be forgotten, he whispered to the image of his father, and he will not be forgiven. The war had a new name. It was no longer about teaching a lesson in respect. It was about dismantling a legacy built on lies and reclaiming a stolen destiny. The following days at Ellington Systems headquarters were charged with a new, unspoken intensity. The air in the executive wing, usually a calm hum of productive energy, now crackled with a quiet urgency. Marcus moved through the halls like a storm cloud, his face an impassive mask that betrayed none of the tempest raging within. His team only knew that their CEO was more focused, more driven, and more dangerously quiet than they had ever seen him. By Friday, Ethan Cole walked into Marcus's office, a sleek, encrypted tablet in his hand. He closed the glass door behind him, the sound sealing them in a cocoon of silence high above the bustling San Diego Bay. You were right, Ethan began, his voice low. This is more than just a corporate profile. He slid the tablet across the polished mahogany desk. It's a creation myth, and it's built on a foundation of lies. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes scanning the screen. The report was exhaustive. It detailed Richard Kane's rise from a smooth-talking salesman to the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar airline. But the early years were what held Marcus's attention. There it was, in black and white, Kane's first venture, a small tech startup called Logic Solutions, co-founded with a brilliant but financially naive engineer named David Ellington. The report laid it all out. Logic had developed a groundbreaking logistics software, the intellectual predecessor to everything that now powered the global aviation industry. The patents, all filed under David Ellington's name. The company was on the verge of securing a major contract that would have made them both millionaires. Then, the betrayal. The report detailed how Kane had systematically siphoned funds, created a shell corporation, and transferred the intellectual property into it just before dissolving the original partnership. He had used a loophole in their hastily signed agreement, a clause David Ellington, in his trusting nature, had never thought to question. Kane walked away with the technology, the contract, and the future. David Ellington was left with lawsuits, debt, and a shattered reputation. The report continued. Kane had rebranded the stolen software, sold it for a massive profit, and used the capital to begin his ascent. Eventually acquiring a struggling regional airline, he renamed Sky West Horizons. He built his empire on the ashes of his partner's dream. He didn't just steal from your father, Marcus, Ethan said softly, watching his friend's face. He erased him. There are almost no public records of your father's involvement. Caney rewrote history. Marcus stared at the screen, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the desk. The confirmation of his suspicion didn't bring relief, only a cold, heavy certainty. The humiliation at the gala wasn't a coincidence. Caney had known exactly who he was. That polite, dismissive smile was the same one he had given his father 30 years ago. It was the smile of a victor, reminding the vanquished of their place. The gala, Marcus said, his voice a guttural whisper. It was a message. A power play, Ethan agreed. He saw you, the son of the man he destroyed, standing in a room full of the powerful. He had to put you back in your box. He had to remind you, and himself, who won. Marcus finally looked up from the tablet, and the look in his eyes made Ethan take an involuntary step back. The calm control was gone, replaced by the cold fire of a distant star on the verge of going supernova. He thinks he won, Marcus said slowly, each word dropping into the silence like a stone into a deep well. He's been living in a world he stole for 30 years. It's time to foreclose on the debt. He stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the Pacific. The ocean was calm today, a vast expanse of blue, but Marcus saw a battlefield. Ethan, he commanded, not turning around. Assemble the senior strategy team. Boardroom, 1 hour. What's the agenda? A paradigm shift, Marcus said, his reflection a dark silhouette against the bright sky. SkyWest Horizons is no longer our client. They are our target. An hour later, the senior team of Ellington Systems was gathered around the holographic projection table in the main boardroom. The room was a glass cage suspended over the city, smelling of ionized air and unspoken ambition. Marcus stood at the head of the table, not as their CEO, but as a general before his war council. He didn't share the personal history. He didn't need to. He framed it in the cold, hard language of business. SkyWest Horizons has become complacent, he began, his voice resonating with absolute authority. Their leadership is arrogant, and their infrastructure is entirely dependent on our ecosystem. This dependency is a liability we can no longer afford. Our priority is to shift our premier services to more dynamic and respectful partners. He gestured to the holographic display. The intricate web of Ellington Systems network glowed in the center of the room. Effective immediately. All premium support, all developmental resources, and all next-generation rollouts currently allocated to SkyWest are to be frozen. They will receive only the bare minimum service stipulated by the letter of their existing contract. No more, no less. A murmur went through the room. This was an unprecedented move against a client of SkyWest's size. All freed-up resources, Marcus continued, his voice dropping, will be reallocated to our secondary partners, Atlantic Air and Pacific Crown. Offer them our premier package, the one we were developing for SkyWest, at a preferred rate. I want them to have the best technology, the best support, the fastest integration. I want them to fly circles around SkyWest. His VP of Operations, a sharp woman named Maria, raised a hand. Marcus, this will cripple them. Their entire system from ticketing to maintenance schedules to crew rostering will grind to a halt. The contract has clauses about maintaining operational stability. We will maintain it, Marcus countered, his eyes glinting. But we will do so without enthusiasm. Every support ticket they file will go to the back of the queue. Every request for an update will be met with a bureaucratic delay. We will honor the contract to the letter. But the spirit is dead. They wanted to treat us like service staff. So, we will give them the service they deserve. The message was clear. This was not a business decision. This was a declaration. For the next 2 hours, they planned the siege. Code was rewritten. Support protocols were altered. Resources were funneled away from SkyWest in a silent, digital exodus. By the time the meeting adjourned, the gears of a massive, invisible war machine had begun to turn. As the team filed out, Ethan remained. This is going to be a bloodbath. Marcus. He drew first blood 30 years ago, Marcus replied, his gaze still fixed on the holographic map where SkyWest's network icon was already being flagged for deprioritization. I'm just balancing the books. He knew Caney would fight back. He would use his influence, his connections, his media mouthpieces. But Caney was playing chess on a board from the last century. Marcus was fighting in a new domain, a digital battlefield where he was the architect, the king, and the executioner. SkyWest Horizons was about to learn that in the modern world. The code was law, and he was the lawmaker. The first tremors hit SkyWest Horizons not with a bang, but with 1,000 tiny, maddening fractures. At LAX, a gate agent's computer froze mid-booking, creating a line of furious passengers that snaked back through the terminal. In Chicago O'Hare, the automated baggage system glitched, sending a mountain of luggage to Dallas instead of Denver. In Atlanta, a pilot stared at his tablet in disbelief as the flight crew roster for his transatlantic flight simply vanished, leaving him with a fully boarded plane and no co-pilot assigned. These were small fires, but they were erupting everywhere, all at once. The airline's central nervous system, the Ellington system software that managed every facet of its sprawling operation, was becoming sluggish, unresponsive, and hostile. Linda Foster, a veteran flight attendant with 32 years of loyal service to SkyWest, felt the chaos firsthand. She stood in the crew lounge at JFK, watching junior attendants frantically tapping at their phones. My schedule just changed for the 3rd time this morning. A young woman lamented. They have me flying to Seattle, but my hotel and transport are still booked for Miami. The system is a mess. Another added, I tried to call scheduling, but the line has been busy for an hour. Linda, whose calm demeanor had soothed countless anxious passengers over the decades, felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her own stomach. She had seen strikes, weather disasters, and technical meltdowns. But this was different. This felt like the airline was developing an autoimmune disease, attacking itself from the inside out. The reliable, seamless technology that had been the backbone of her career was now a source of constant, crippling frustration. Meanwhile, in the SkyWest corporate headquarters, a gleaming tower in Chicago that Richard Caney called the Horizon, panic was setting in. The operations center, usually a hive of quiet efficiency, was a cacophony of ringing phones and shouted reports. Sir, we have 17 flights grounded at DFW due to a crew scheduling failure. An analyst yelled across the room. The maintenance logs for the entire 737 fleet are inaccessible. Another cried out. We can't clear them for takeoff. Richard Caney stormed through the center, his face a thunderous mask. What is going on? Get Ellington Systems on the phone now. His COO, a harried man named Greg, held a phone to his ear, his expression growing more desperate by the second. I've been on hold for 25 minutes. They keep telling me our ticket is in the queue. In the queue, Caney roared, snatching the phone. We're their biggest aviation client. We don't wait in a queue. He barked into the receiver, his voice dripping with authority. This is Richard Kane, CEO of SkyWest Horizons. Put me through to Marcus Ellington immediately. The response on the other end was a masterpiece of polite, Infuriating obstruction. I'm sorry, sir. Mr. Ellington is in a strategy meeting with our priority partners. Your request has been logged. Someone will get back to you within the standard response time of 24 to 48 business hours. The line went dead. Caney stared at the phone in his hand as if it were a venomous snake. Priority partners. Standard response time. The words were corporate jargon, but the message was a blade. Ellington was cutting him off. The chaos escalated over the next 2 weeks. News outlets, smelling blood, began to run stories. SkyWest in freefall airline plagued by technical issues, screamed a CNN headline. Social media was a dumpster fire of angry customers posting videos of crowded airports and canceled flights. The company's stock began a precipitous slide. At the same time, glowing reports began to surface about Atlantic Air and Pacific Crown. Their on-time performance had skyrocketed. They were rolling out new customer-friendly apps and seamless booking experiences. The press hailed their sudden surge, crediting their adoption of next-generation operational technology. No one mentioned that it was the very technology that had been promised to SkyWest. In San Diego, Marcus watched the fallout from his office, a silent predator observing his trap. Ethan entered, holding a tablet displaying SkyWest's plummeting stock price. "They're bleeding," Ethan said, a note of awe in his voice. "They've lost 15% of their market value in 2 weeks. Caney is trying to call you on your private line every hour." "Let him," Marcus said, his eyes not leaving the screen where a live feed showed a news report from a chaotic SkyWest terminal. He needs to understand what it feels like to be ignored. Finally, after a week of being stonewalled, Richard Caney did the only thing he could. He sent a formal, groveling email requesting an urgent in-person meeting. He offered to fly to San Diego immediately to discuss reaffirming their strategic partnership. Marcus read the email, a faint, mirthless smile touching his lips. Caney was ready to beg. The first phase of his plan was complete. He replied with a single sentence, "My schedule is quite full, but I can make time for you tomorrow. 10 a.m., my office." The next morning, Richard Caney was ushered into the serene, minimalist expanse of Marcus Ellington's office. The contrast with his own chaotic headquarters could not have been more stark. Here, there was only calm, control, and the quiet hum of immense power. Caney, who was used to being the most powerful man in any room, found himself feeling small and exposed. He forced a smile, extending a hand. "Marcus, thank you for seeing me. I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding." Marcus did not take his hand. He simply gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Sit down, Richard." The snub was a clear signal. This was not a meeting between partners. It was an interrogation. Caney sat, his forced bonhomie evaporating. "Look, Marcus, I don't know what's happened, but the service from your team has fallen off a cliff. It's crippling us. We have a contract, and we are fulfilling it." Marcus interrupted, his voice as cool and hard as the glass desk between them. "To the letter. You are receiving exactly what you paid for." "This is not what we paid for," Caney protested, his voice rising. "We paid for a partnership. We paid for priority support." Marcus leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. His gaze was so intense, it felt like a physical weight. Priority is an interesting word, Richard. It implies a hierarchy, a system where some are deemed more important than others. You're a great believer in that system, aren't you? Caney shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The Innovators Gala. You and your son. You looked right at me and saw someone who didn't belong. A member of the catering staff. Perhaps? Color drained from Caney's face. He finally understood. This wasn't about a technical issue. It was personal. He quickly tried to recover, adopting a tone of deep contrition. My God! Marcus! I am so sorry. My son. He can be arrogant. It was a mistake. A terrible, regrettable mistake. A mistake, Marcus repeated, savoring the word. You see, I don't think it was. I think in that moment, you and your son acted on your most basic assumption about the world that people like me are here to serve people like you, and you saw nothing wrong with that. He stood up and walked to the window, his back to Caney. But the real reason I've been so preoccupied isn't just about that night. It's about a much older mistake. He turned, his eyes burning with a righteous fury that had been banked for 30 years. Tell me, Richard, do you remember a small company called Aero Logic Solutions? Do you remember a brilliant engineer named David Ellington? The name hit Richard Caney like a physical blow. He slumped back in his chair, his face a ghastly shade of pale. The carefully constructed mask of the powerful CEO shattered, revealing the petty thief underneath. He was speechless. I see you do, Marcus said, his voice laced with cold satisfaction. You didn't just insult me at that gala, Richard. You dismissed the son of the man whose genius you stole to build your entire empire. You looked at the legacy you tried to erase and, out of sheer arrogance, you tried to erase it again. He returned to his desk and sat down. Once again, the calm, controlled master of his domain. So, no. Richard, this is not a misunderstanding. This is a correction, a rebalancing of a historical debt. SkyWest Horizons was built on a crime, and I am the bill that has finally come due. He picked up a pen, a gesture of finality. Your contract will not be renewed. Your systems will be fully decommissioned in 90 days. As per the termination clause, I would advise you to start looking for a new provider. Though I imagine after the news of this gets out, you may have trouble finding one. Caney stared at him, his mouth opening and closing. But no words came out. He was utterly broken, defeated not by market forces or corporate intrigue, but by a ghost from his past. Was respect also a minor discrepancy when you dealt with my father? Richard, Marcus asked quietly, twisting the knife. With that, he pressed a button on his desk. Ethan will show you out. Richard Caney stumbled to his feet and walked out of the office. Not as a titan of industry, but as a man who had just seen his world condemned. The war wasn't over, but the decisive battle had just been won. The 90-day countdown was an execution timer for SkyWest Horizons. The news that Ellington Systems was severing ties sent shockwaves through the industry. The airline stock didn't just slide, it plummeted off a cliff. Competitors, smelling blood and empowered by Ellington's superior technology, began a feeding frenzy, aggressively poaching SkyWest's most profitable routes and corporate accounts. For Marcus, this was only the second phase. Destruction was easy. True justice required something more. He began his next move, operating with the same silent precision, using a series of third-party investment firms to mask his activity. He began buying up SkyWest's devalued stock. He bought it in small, untraceable blocks, accumulating a significant stake while the company was in its death spiral. He wasn't just dismantling Kane's empire. He was preparing to claim its ruins. Inside SkyWest, the atmosphere was one of mourning. Employees who had dedicated their lives to the airline walked the halls like ghosts. Linda Foster saw it every day. She saw the fear in the eyes of the gate agents, The weary resignation of the pilots. The quiet tears of her fellow flight attendants, who worried about their mortgages and their children's futures. They were good, hard-working people caught in a storm created by a man they had never met. Her loyalty to the airline was being tested, but her empathy for her colleagues was stronger than ever. Richard Caney, meanwhile, was a man besieged. He was a pariah in the industry. His board of directors, once his staunchest allies, were now openly hostile, demanding his resignation. He grew haggard and paranoid, seeing conspiracies everywhere, refusing to accept that this was a reckoning of his own making. His son, Brandon, the catalyst for the entire disaster, had vanished from the public eye, his extravagant lifestyle funded by a rapidly dwindling fortune. The world he had taken for granted was dissolving around him. The climax arrived on the day of the annual Sky West Horizons shareholder meeting. The event, usually a self-congratulatory affair held in a grand hotel ballroom, had been moved to a sterile convention center near the airport, a cost-cutting measure that screamed desperation. The atmosphere was funereal. The meeting was being live-streamed globally, and the world was watching to see a corporate giant take its final, gasping breaths. Richard Caney stood on the stage, a shadow of his former self. His suit hung loosely on his frame, and his voice trembled as he presented a desperate, unconvincing recovery plan. The giant screen behind him displayed falling stock prices and grim projections, a digital monument to his failure. When he finished, he opened the floor to questions. A tense silence filled the room. No one wanted to be the one to ask the obvious: how could the company possibly survive? Then, a figure rose from the middle of the audience, a man in a simple, elegant dark suit, his presence radiating a calm, unshakable authority. It was Marcus Ellington. A ripple of shock and frantic whispers spread through the room. Cameras swiveled to focus on him as he walked to the microphone. Caney's face went ashen. He looked like a man seeing a ghost. "Mr. Kane," Marcus began, his voice amplified throughout the cavernous hall, calm and clear. "Marcus Ellington, while I am not an invited guest, I am here as a representative of the Stratos Investment Group, which, as of this morning, has become your company's single largest shareholder." The room erupted. The revelation was a bombshell. The man who had crippled the airline now effectively owned it. Marcus waited for the noise to subside. His eyes locked on Caney. "I don't have a question. Richard, I have a statement. And some evidence." He nodded to Ethan, who was standing by the tech booth. The grim financial charts on the screen behind Caney were replaced by a scanned document, the original partnership agreement for Aerologic Solutions, signed by David Ellington and Richard Caney. 30 years ago, Marcus said, his voice resonating with the weight of history. The technology that became the foundation of this airline was created by a man named David Ellington. My father. He was your partner, Richard. A partner you betrayed. You stole his work, erased his name, and built this empire on his broken dream. He continued, his voice never rising, yet every word landed with the force of a hammer blow. He laid out the entire story, presenting documents, patents, and financial records that Ethan projected onto the screen. It was an irrefutable, damning account of Caney's original sin. The culture of this company, Marcus concluded, his gaze sweeping over the horrified faces of the board members on stage, began with that first act of profound disrespect, a culture where a brilliant engineer could be dismissed, a culture that, decades later, allowed your own son to publicly humiliate a customer because he didn't look important enough. The rot didn't start 2 months ago. Gentlemen, it started at the very beginning. The collapse of SkyWest Horizons is not a technical failure. It is a moral one. He had Caney cornered, defeated, exposed to the world. He had one final piece of evidence proof of Caney's financial malfeasance that would not only ruin him, but would trigger investigations that would likely dissolve the company entirely, liquidating its assets and terminating every employee. This was the final blow, the kill shot. He reached into his pocket for the flash drive containing the files. His gaze drifted across the audience and, for a moment, it met the eyes of Linda Foster. She was sitting in a section reserved for long-serving employees, her face a portrait of fear and despair. In her eyes, Marcus didn't see a corporate entity or a symbol of Caney's corruption. He saw a good person, a woman who had given her life to a company she believed in, now watching her future, and the futures of thousands like her, about to be vaporized for the sake of his justice. He saw his father, not the victim, but the builder, a man who created things, who believed in making the world work better. What would he want? Would he want this empty, scorched earth victory, or would he want Marcus to build something new from the ashes? The choice crystallized in an instant. His goal was not pure destruction. It was a more difficult, more meaningful form of justice. Marcus lowered his hand from his pocket. He looked back at Richard Kane, who was trembling on the stage, utterly broken. Therefore, Marcus announced, his voice ringing with a new purpose. As the majority shareholder, I am calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current CEO and board of directors. Following their removal, I will present a new plan. A plan not to liquidate this company, but to rebuild it from the ground up, on a new foundation. He paused, letting his final words sink in. A foundation of respect. The room was silent for a beat, and then it exploded into a frenzy of camera flashes and shouting journalists. Richard Caney stared at Marcus, his expression one of utter, uncomprehending defeat. He had been expecting annihilation, but Marcus had delivered something far more profound, a complete and total usurpation. He hadn't just destroyed Caney's legacy, he had come to claim it and remake it in his own image. The aftermath of the shareholder meeting was swift and decisive. Richard Caney and his entire board were ousted in a landslide vote. Marcus Ellington was installed as the new chairman, with full authority to restructure the company. The world watched, breathless, expecting a brutal corporate raid. They expected mass layoffs, the sale of assets, the carving up of a fallen giant. Marcus gave them something else entirely. His first act was to call an all-hands meeting, broadcast to every SkyWest employee worldwide. From the same stage where Richard Caney had crumbled, Marcus addressed the thousands of terrified workers, from pilots and mechanics to baggage handlers and flight attendants. Linda Foster sat in the front row, invited personally by Marcus's office, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and a fragile, nascent hope. My name is Marcus Ellington, he began, his voice calm and direct. I know many of you are scared. You have read the headlines, and you are worried about your jobs, your futures, and the company you have given so much to. I am not here to reassure you with empty corporate platitudes. I am here to make you a promise. He looked directly into the camera, and then his eyes found Linda's in the audience. This airline is not closing. We are not here to sell it off for parts. We are here to rebuild. But we are going to do it differently. The era of a top-down culture, of arrogance and dismissal, is over, effective immediately. We are instituting a new core principle, one that will guide every decision we make, from the boardroom to the jet bridge. He paused, his voice ringing with conviction. That principle is dignity. Dignity for our customers, and dignity for every single one of you. Your work matters. You matter. Over the following weeks, Marcus was true to his word. He fired the corrupt and incompetent upper management, the sycophants who had enabled Caney's culture of contempt. But he didn't bring in his own people from the outside. Instead, he looked within. He initiated a company-wide review, identifying talented, ethical, and dedicated employees who had been overlooked for years. He promoted a veteran pilot with a reputation for integrity to head of flight operations. He put a sharp, no-nonsense head mechanic in charge of maintenance, and he called a shocked and humbled Linda Foster into his new office. "Linda," he said, rising to shake her hand warmly, "during that shareholder meeting, and on the flight that started all this, you spoke up when it would have been easier to stay silent. You stood for what was right. That is the kind of leadership this company needs." He offered her the position of Vice President of In-Flight Experience, tasking her with completely overhauling customer service training, building a new program centered on empathy and respect. The transformation was electric, empowered and valued for the first time in years. The employees of SkyWest rallied behind their new leader. Morale soared. Ellington Systems' cutting-edge technology was reintegrated, not as a tool of a vendor, but as the central nervous system of a new, revitalized organism. Efficiency and on-time performance reached unprecedented levels. The final, symbolic act of rebirth came 6 months later. Marcus stood on a sun-drenched tarmac before the press, employees, and the public. Behind him was a newly painted aircraft, its livery a sleek, hopeful design of silver and blue. The old SkyWest Horizons logo was gone. In its place was a new name that gleamed in the morning light. "Today, we are not just unveiling a new coat of paint," Marcus announced to the cheering crowd. "We are christening a new identity. Our airline was born from the ashes of a broken promise, but it will now fly toward a new horizon. We are reborn as Ellington Phoenix Air." He gestured to the side of the plane, where, just below the cockpit window, a new company motto was inscribed in elegant lettering. It was a tribute to his father, a promise to his customers, and the founding principle of his new legacy. It read, "Dignity in every mile." As the crowd applauded, Marcus looked up at the plane, a symbol of a future reclaimed from the past. He had not simply avenged his father, he had honored him. He had taken an empire built on theft and disrespect and transformed it into a monument of integrity and respect. The debt had been paid, the books balanced, the ghost of the past was finally at peace, and a new legacy was ready to take flight.